Back in November 2020, I explored the folklore of the yew tree, specifically the common yew or English yew, Taxus baccata. Yes, it's a poisonous tree. Yes, it's linked with death. And yes, people like to say they predate the churchyards in which we find them. But in the intervening 6 years, my library of sources has grown, so I wanted to see if there was anything more I could learn about them. They are my favourite tree, and I always love spotting them in parks and cemeteries. There's something deeply restful and reassuring about a yew tree. My fascination with trees within ecosystems has also grown, so I wanted to explore the yew outside of folklore. How and why are these trees so cool and so different from other trees? So let's explore their dendrology, their uses to humans, and yes, their links with death, before we meet some more famous yews in this week's episode of Fabulous Folklore. Hello there, and welcome to Fabulous Folklore, the podcast for all things folklore, occult, and just a bit weird. I'm your host, Icy Sedgwick, blogger, fantasy author, and your guide into these rather mysterious realms. I've got some rare things to show you, so come on in, take a look around, but be careful not to touch anything. These things sometimes bite. Well, hello there, and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore with me, your host, Icy Sedgwick. I do hope you're well. As always, I am recording this in advance, and I think I've outdone myself this time, because this episode should be going out on the 14th of March, and it's actually the 3rd of March when I'm recording it, so I've no idea what's going on with the state of the world, so I'm not passing any comment on the news, because I've got literally no idea what will be happening in the intervening 11 days. I can only hope that we'll all still be here to hear it, not least because this comes out on my birthday, but also just because of the fact that, it would be quite nice if things could get resolved. So yeah, that's why I'm not commenting on the news. And as always, I know some of you do actually find the podcast quite a relaxing, almost safe space to have a little bit of decompression time. And I do think that when you are surrounded by certain types of news and so on, you do need to comfort your nervous system a little bit. And hopefully the podcast will help you to do that, particularly with yew trees. As I say, they are my absolute favourite tree. I'm not even 100% sure why. I just love them. I always have. I think that they're brilliant. They're really cool as well, just from like an actual tree point of view. The stuff that they do is just so weird compared to other trees. And obviously, yes, being a goth, I kind of have to like them anyway because of all their slightly morbid links and so on. So there we go. We're going to start off with them in dendrology though, and if you wonder what dendrology is, I actually had to look this up. It's essentially the tree equivalent of botany, so that's basically what we're looking at. So in terms of the tree as a tree, the yew is dioecious, which means each tree is either male or female, although apparently there have been some instances where trees have changed sex at some point as they get older, which is quite cool. And some consider the yew a type of conifer, which obviously would be things like pine and fir, except it keeps its seeds inside an aril, which is a red berry-like structure rather than in a cone. And that's one of the easy ways to spot a yew, really. If you've got something that has like needle-like leaves and then these really bright red, what look like berries on it, it's a yew tree. It's often almost impossible to actually date yew trees and discover their venerable age. And I'm sure we all know that people can usually count the rings in a tree trunk to determine a tree's age, because trees usually add a layer of bark every year and that's what forms the ring. Yews, being the contrary trees that they are, send out exploratory branches which then put out roots when they run along the ground, and they can then form new trunks while the old trunk rots and becomes hollow. So with no solid trunk, there are no rings to count. So people genuinely have no idea how old most yew trees are, which I think is hilarious. While most of the tree is toxic, that does have to be said, so don't be going round chewing on them or anything. That would be a horrifically bad idea. The flesh of the red berries is the only part that's not toxic, but you still wouldn't want to eat them. So during a tree identification walk in Jesmond, botanist James Common described the texture of the berries as being very snot-like, and apparently people have sometimes tried eating them, but it's just the texture of them is really unpleasant. And other people have called them, and I quote, snot gobbles, snotty gogs, and snotter berries, end quote. So make of that what you will. Blackbirds, thrushes, fieldfare squirrels and dormice apparently don't mind this absolutely disgusting texture because they eat the fruit. And it is one of the ways that the yew tree basically disperses its seeds, because obviously then the bird then poops the seed out later on, and then thus another yew tree can grow. and the satin beauty moth eats the needles. So I thought that was really quite cool that something called the beauty moth ate a really poisonous part of the tree. That's all I'm going to say on that one. And yew hedges might be great for ornamental gardens, which is usually where a lot of people actually encounter them. But they're also brilliant locations for bird nests because they're really dense, and goldcrests and firecrests nest in them. And I don't know about you, but goldcrests and firecrests really sound like they should be types of dragon, not bird. But there we go. In terms of its name, it does get a little bit confusing because no one's 100% sure where yew actually comes from, and Dr. Johnson apparently thought that it might come from ip, an Anglo-Saxon word, or yew, a Welsh word, which would make it the only British tree bearing a Celtic name if that was true. And of course its scientific name is Taxus, which in some sources comes from Taxos, a Greek word which is similar to toxon, a word for bow, and obviously yews were used to make bows. And according to myth, warriors also once tipped arrows with poison from yews, which gave us the word toxicon or poisonous. So I quite like the fact that if that is indeed true, basically this really toxic tree gave us the word for toxic. But despite how poison it is, the yew tree is actually still useful to humans. And surprisingly, the yew as a species actually survived the Ice Age. And the species is some 200 million years old, so they're incredibly old. And that basically means that they've been around humans for a really long time. Yews provided wood for early Homo sapiens, and a yew spear found in a woolly mammoth skeleton in England actually dated back to 20,000 BCE, which obviously is quite old. Yew wood also appears in drinking vessels in Ireland, and one beautiful example of a goblet-like cup turned up in County Fermanagh, and testing revealed it to be common or English yew, which by that point in the late 1950s was already rare in the wild in Ireland. And WACB drew comparisons with the Dunvegan cup, an Irish cup held by the MacLeod family on the Isle of Skye, and the Fermanagh cup was dated to the mid to late 16th century. There is, of course, the Irish yew as well, which is Taxus baccata fastigiata, which is a cultivar of the common yew, and all Irish yews actually descend from a single tree found in County Fermanagh in the 1700s. People in the UK then adopted it for ornamental planting since it tolerates pollution. But surprisingly, there's also a belief in the use of yews in dowsing, and if you'd lost something and wanted to find it, you could hold out a yew branch in front of you. It would lead you to the lost object, and then it would turn in your hand when you reached it, which is quite helpful. Yeah, I think yew is probably more famous for its use in English longbows, and there are suggestions that the word yeoman actually comes from yeomen, and here the word specifically referred to archers, even if it has then gone on to mean a wider series of roles. In 1349, Edward III decreed that men must take up archery rather than playing football or wasting time with cockfighting. Henry VIII then added in 1511 that men must practice archery and have a bow ready at home. And such was the importance of the yew to bow making that people needed permits to cut yews, and felling yews in medieval England carried similar punishments to rustling livestock. Speaking of archery, one legend claims that Robin Hood's final arrow fell at the foot of a yew, marking where he wished to be buried. And another story claims he married Maid Marian beneath a yew tree. That was surprisingly difficult to say. But in France, Spain and Italy, lute makers once used yew for their instruments, and when yew became popular for weapons instead, lute makers changed wood, and yew lutes actually disappeared after 1630. But it also appears in an ornamental sense as well, and according to Edward Stepp in 1905, John Evelyn was the person who suggested the use of yew for topiary rather than box or juniper, mostly because clipping it doesn't actually seem to impact its vitality, although thankfully topiary has fallen out of fashion. A far more surprising use of yew trees actually appeared in early Christmas decorations, and you've probably heard about all the stories about Prince Albert apparently introducing the Christmas tree into England, and it being the way that the pine tree or the fir tree ended up being the Christmas tree. Well, actually, Queen Charlotte, wife of George III, was the one who set up the first known Christmas tree in 1761 in Windsor, but the difference is that she decorated a yew branch according to the tradition practiced in Mecklenburg-Strelitz. By 1800s, she'd actually switched from a single bough to an entire yew tree, which she decorated with baubles, fruit and presents, and set it up in Queen's Lodge. And it became a firm favourite with the children, which was the whole point of Charlotte's festive creativity. Now, the difference, of course, is that only really caught on with the upper classes, and it was Albert's introduction of the fir tree that then got picked up by everybody else. But it's quite interesting to see the yew tree originally associated at Christmas. although it was actually considered a death omen to accidentally bring yew into the house among the evergreens at Christmas, because a death would occur in the family before the year's end if you did. So instead, people would apparently keep Christmas evergreens up until Candlemas Day, when they would then replace them with box sprigs, and they would keep the box decorations until Easter Eve, when they would then replace that with yew. And yew makes a somewhat obvious plan for Easter through its associations with resurrection. And of course, that is the main association that you can't overlook when it comes to yews, is this whole link with death and so on. And I think their toxicity clearly plays a role in that particular link. And indeed, the Romans held a superstition to never use yews in ornamental gardens, and this may be due to a belief that yews guarded the entrance to their underworld. It also possibly explains why they used yew for their funerals when they invaded Britain, rather than pine or cypress. It's also entirely possible that yew was just easier to come across as well. Richard Foucault related an old legend, and according to him, probably of monkish origin, which explained the emotions felt by plants at the crucifixion. So according to him, the yew said, and I quote, "I will be the guardian of graveyards, no bee shall pillage with impunity my poisoned flowers, no bird shall rest on my branches, for my exhalations shall give forth death," end quote, which is pretty hardcore. And this perhaps explains the use of yew branches on Palm Sunday, carried in church processions in place of palm branches. The tree also represented sorrow in some language of flowers dictionaries, and in others it also represented resurrection and faith. Richard Foucault also relates an old practice in England to carry yew branches during the procession to the grave, and to put the branches in the grave beneath the bodies being buried. He also notes a tendency to place garlands of yew, willow and rosemary on the biers of unfortunate lovers, and I did wonder if the inclusion of yew came from the old Greek myth in which the Greek gods turned Smilax, the nymph, into a yew after her dalliance with Crocus. And of course we can't talk about death and yews without talking about churchyards. And I still can't find a source for the belief that churchyard yew tree roots held the dead in place, but I did find another odd belief in a North American publication, and they repeated a popular myth, as they called it, in which, and I quote, "The churchyard yew sends its roots into the throats of the buried dead, retrieves their untold secrets, and transforms them into whispers to be blown loose from the foliage in the wind," end quote. There was also a truly odd belief that yew branches absorbed poisonous vapours, and even more bizarre, people believed that graves on the west side of a churchyard produced more vapours due to the setting sun, or indeed ignis fatui, I kid you not, and this, they assumed, explained why people planted yews in that part of the churchyard to absorb said vapours. The location of yews in consecrated ground also meant that witches detested them. But despite the links with death, yews are incredibly important in healthcare, because in the 1960s, the National Cancer Institute discovered that Taxol, derived from yew, had immense cancer-fighting properties. And even better, the Taxol could be derived from the needles rather than the bark, making Taxol a sustainable drug that didn't require the trees to be felled. And Taxol is still used in the treatment of breast, ovarian and lung cancer. There are obviously plenty of other things to do with yew trees that I haven't talked about because I did mention them in the first episode, so this is all like entirely new content. And last time we did talk about the Fortingall yew in Scotland, and this time I wanted to have a look at a couple of other famous yews. And yes, there are actually a few. And given their ability to reach somewhat prodigious sizes, yews can often be something of a showstopper in their location. So St Mary the Virgin is a Grade 1 listed church in Painswick in the Cotswolds, and it's famous for its 99 yew trees. Planted in the 18th century, the trees do enjoy an annual trim, and the clippings are then used to source Taxol, which is really cool. But according to local folklore, there can never be more than 99 trees, so if anyone planted a 100th tree, the devil would come along and destroy it or pull it up. And then you've got the Ankerwick yew, which grows on an island near the north bank of the Thames at Runnymede. It was already ancient in the 13th century and is believed to have witnessed the signing of the Magna Carta, which is the closest we come to a constitution. Other legends see King Henry VIII courting Anne Boleyn beneath the same tree and even proposing to her there. So if those legends are indeed true, then the Ankerwick yew has seen quite a lot of important historical events. And of course, given what happened to Anne Boleyn, that was probably quite prophetic. And my favourite one is a yew grew in the cloister of Vertou in Brittany, and according to legend, it actually sprung from the staff of St Martin of Vertou. So he just basically came along and sort of drove his staff into the ground and this yew tree grew, much like we get the same legend with the staff of Joseph of Arimathea and the hawthorn at Glastonbury. But with the one in Brittany, Breton nobles offered up prayers beneath its branches before entering the church. And it seems this particular tree was highly venerated, with no one even plucking a single needle from its boughs. A band of brigands spotted it while in the area, and 2 of them clambered into the branches. They cut boughs to use as bows, but the yew got the last laugh, because both fell from the tree and died instantly. And the tree still appears on the Virtue coat of arms even now. So what do we make of yew trees? Well, plenty of the sources I examined for this second look at them refer to the trees as being sombre or sorrowful, but I don't know if that's simply because they're found in churchyards. So if, like me, you're quite the taphophile, which just means lover of graveyards, churchyards probably don't have the same mournful atmosphere. Yet yew trees seem almost contrary compared to other trees. They rarely grow in the same way, giving them such a glorious range of trunk sizes and shapes. Their ability to send out new branches and start growing new trunks makes them the only tree really capable of movement in a way. They withstand storms, and their low profile means that they're not as physically imposing as something like the Cheapside Plane, yet they still have a personality of their own. It's likely that their location in churchyards and toxic profile explain the persistent associations with death, though I rather think we can also find hope in their links with resurrection and great longevity, especially when they give us cancer drugs. Still, I also think the nobles offering prayers beneath the Virtue yew should be our final point, because yew trees grow to advanced ages, meaning they've often seen royal dynasties rise and fall, only to be replaced by another regime that rises and falls, because this is the thing, empires always fall. But the yew tree quietly watches all of this going on, and while Harry Baker Cy King referred to the tree at Sycamore Gap as being a sentinel of time, I think that title actually belongs to the yew. Given they've seen it all, next time you encounter one, maybe tell it your problems, but listen carefully, because it might just offer you some advice in return. How do you feel about yew trees? I'm going to hazard a guess. Few people probably have as much of a thing about them as I do. I just think that they're absolutely marvellous. I think they're being evergreens as well mean that they obviously brighten up a lot of scenery, which is quite funny if you then go into a churchyard in winter and all the other trees are bare and then yew trees are like, hello, I'm still green. That's like the least deathy thing that you can do. So I think that's quite funny. They are really contrary, which is probably another reason why I quite like them. But I do think that they're probably misunderstood, but should also be treated with respect as well. So just remember, most of it's poisonous, so best to just leave it alone. Next week, we're going to do a tree which I haven't done before, and I'm torn between the poplar and the walnut. I haven't decided which one to have a look at yet. Both have folklore. Walnut then obviously also takes us into actual walnuts as well, so that one might be the better option, but like I say, I haven't quite decided yet. So I hope that you are enjoying Tree Month. If there are any requests that you've got, as I say, please do let me know. There's a plethora of trees already on the podcast because it turns out people really, really want to know more about trees and plants. The fungus one, a little bit more difficult to do for reasons I explained in the fungi episode, but occasionally people do ask if I know anything about them. It depends on the fungus in question, really. But anyway, hope you enjoyed that. As always, there's plenty of additional content on Patreon is the big one. That's where the archive of all the old content is, because that's the one that's been running the longest. There are bonus episodes on Ko-fi and Substack as well, if you prefer to support there. But there's just not as many of them because, as I say, the back catalogue of them is over on Patreon because that was what I started first. But there we go. So I hope you enjoy all of that. And like I said at the beginning, it is my birthday today. So all things being equal, we should hopefully be going to the coast for chips because that's how we rock in this particular part of the country. That is my idea of a good time. I don't know about anybody else's. But I think that'll do for now, as far as I'm concerned. So I hope that you all have a marvellous week ahead. I'm wishing health, hope and happiness to everyone. And I will see you next week. Cheerio. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. I don't get paid per play of the podcast like musicians do, so if you'd like to support the podcast so I can keep it ad-free and help me pay for all the annoying stuff like web hosting and cover the hours it takes me to make these episodes, then you can buy me a coffee on Ko-fi or become a member of the Fabulous Folklore family by becoming a paid supporter on Ko-fi, Patreon and Substack. Or you can leave a review, tell a friend or share episodes on social media for free. It all helps.